Hello guys, and welcome to The Little House on the Prairie Season 5 review. I just finished it a couple of days ago and I'm already on Season 6, so I figured I'd go ahead, before I fully get into Season 6, review this for you. Season 5 has a mix of episodes that are kind of sort of they have 5 episodes where we're in a different location, and then we have a lot of random episodes that don't amount to much, but they're good still, and I mean, there's just a lot. We come full circle with a lot of things, and a lot of stuff happens over the course of season 5 in the Ingalls family's life. Believe me. Okay, so if you were to be flipping channels one day and you were to come across this season, like you were to start on the first episode of season 5, As Long as We're Together, you might not know what's going on because most people remember at the end of the season 4 finale that Mary becomes blind, but they don't remember why the family decides to move to a different city at the beginning of the season. Well, I'm not abundantly clear, but it has something to do with the railroad. Supplies aren't coming to Walnut Grove, and people are having a hard time trying to make a living in the town. So, Mary is going to help Adam open a blind school in Winoka, Dakota, which I don't think is a real place. If it is, I apologize, but I couldn't find if it was or not. Let me know in the comments below if you do know. But anyway, so Charles decides to go and take his family to Winoka to basically accommodate Mary because Charles does not like his family spread out all over the country. So that's why they're going to this new city. It's established in the season 5 premiere, As Long as We're Together, parts 1 and 2, that establish that. But before I get into that, here's the historical timeline of where we're supposed to be at this point in the Ingalls family's life. They arrived in Walnut Grove in 1874. Okay? Charles Jr. was born in 1875 and died 9 months later in 1876. The family briefly moves away from Walnut Grove and goes to Burr Oak, Iowa, where they briefly manage a hotel for a while, and baby Grace Ingalls ends up getting born in Burr Oak, Iowa. The family returns back to Walnut Grove in the fall or winter of 1877. While living in Walnut Grove in 1879, Mary Ingalls loses her sight and the family decides to move to Smart, Dakota. While there, Paul ends up working on the railroad, a job he continued until his death. In 1880, Laura becomes a teacher and meets Almanza Wilder, and they begin courting. And in 1885, they marry each other. So, there you go. The show takes one point of the history of the Ingalls family by having them manage a hotel in Winoka, but they don't exactly follow what the Ingalls family did, because the prominent location for the show is Walnut Grove, Minnesota, because it's a place that you yourself as the viewer would wish you could go, and it does exist. There is a Walnut Grove, Minnesota. It doesn't look like the Walnut Grove you saw on TV, but it's pretty much the same one. And they even have the house in the ground from the banks on the banks of Plum Creek. Sorry. So it is interesting, and I just figured I'd throw that in for context so that we know where we're supposed to be versus where we are. So they make it a point to show that this is a long journey from Minnesota to Dakota. And they use stock footage from the pilot movie. They even show the point where the sun is setting on the wagons before the opening credits roll. And I recognize that almost immediately because that's such a beautiful shot that they used in the pilot movie that I can't believe they reused it. They also reuse a scene from the season 4 episode I remember where Caroline tells Laura and Mary the story of how she met Charles for the first time, where he's fixing the wagon wheel. So then the Garveys and the Olsons end up in Winoka as well. This is just for plot convenience because it makes sense for the 3 prominent families from Walnut Grove to basically be in the same location. Although, plot-wise, there's no point during the first part of the episode where the Garvey family nor the Olson family discusses going to Winoka. There's this wonderful scene between Mrs. Olson and Mrs. Ingalls where they discuss like saying goodbye and saying, I'm going to miss you and I don't know why. And at no point does Nels ever say, well, we're going to Winoka too. And no point does Mr. Garvey say, yeah, we're going too. They just randomly show up in the same city and these are their jobs. Charles becomes a manager of a hotel and ends up doing things that a hotel manager would not do today, like washing windows. Caroline becomes a cook, and how she gets this job is there's a cook in there that and she's played by the actress that played the annoying mother in The Goonies, of the boy that's disfigured and the 2 guys that are after the treasure or whatever. And she plays the cook, and she's not cooking stuff for people, she's eating it herself. Caroline cooks some biscuits, the guy goes, oh, these are heavenly, you're hired, which would never happen today. Mrs. Garvey decides to become a teacher, more on that in a few minutes. Mr. Garvey becomes security for the saloon next door, and Mr. Olson becomes a bartender / waitress in the saloon, waiter. And Mrs. Olson becomes a cocktail waitress so that she could send Nellie and Willie to the private school in town, which Charles cannot afford, and that is why Laura and Andy and Albert have school in a tent. We also get introduced to the evil villain, Mr. Standish, who is a Scrooge-like character who owns all the buildings in town, including the hotel and the saloon that's next door to the hotel. Charles hates Mr. Standish upon sight, and Mr. Standish always reminds him that he's the boss. But don't worry, he gets his karma gets him in the end twice, and we will discuss those a little bit later. So in the first part episode, we get introduced to Albert, an orphan who lives on the street, played by Matthew Limericks. I hope I'm saying his name right. Who played young Charles starting in season 2 and continuing all the way until season 4. He is completely and utterly fiction for the show. There is no census record that an Albert Ingalls ever existed and that the Ingalls family ever adopted a boy. The only boy they had was Charles Jr., and like I just said before, he died 9 months after his birth in 1876 of unknown causes. So Albert was created specifically for the show because they were running out of things for Matthew to do as young Charles because not much is known about Charles Ingalls' childhood. So they were running out of things for him to do, and he was hanging around the set anyway because his brother Andrew, who plays Andy Garvey, was always working as Andy. So they wanted him to be a staple on the show. So they created the role of Albert for him. And Michael Landon loved him so much that he begged the writers to create some sort of role for him to stay on the show. Thus, Albert Ingalls was born, and they take several liberties with his character, and we will get to it as we go along. So just know that he is completely made up for the show. So is Adam Kendall. As far as we know, and Adam Kendall never existed in Mary Ingalls' life. More on that in a bit. So it's established that this is the city, this is where they're living, and this is the way their life is going to be from now on. Some bullies try to bully them, but they only appear in the second part of the season premiere, and then they disappear from that point on, so there's no point of even explaining what happens. So after this two-part season premiere, we get the Winoka Warriors, which is absolutely a boring episode in my opinion. It's about football. There are no stakes in the Ingalls family. Or Laura's story as a whole, it's just filler. The next episode after that is called A Man Inside. This very heavy-set man works for the blind school, and his daughter is embarrassed because he's fat. It's a fantastic episode, and one of my best friend Betty's favorite episodes. After that, we get treated to There's No Place Like Home. Charles has gotten tired of the noise of the city and decides that his family and him must move back to Walnut Grove. But he's reluctant to do so because that would mean leaving Mary behind in Winoka. And Charles doesn't want his family spread out all over the country. And this would have been a fantastic ending for Mary Ingalls on the show. For those of you who may not know, and I've mentioned this in one of my other reviews, I can't remember which one, Mary Ingalls was often sick. Whatever disease was running rapid in the town, she would often catch it. She suffered her blindness as a result of one of those illnesses, and they haven't narrowed it down. Initially, they thought it was scarlet fever, but it could have been anything that caused her blindness. She became blind. She completed 4 years at the blind school. And then, when she came out, she lived with Ma and Pa until Pa died. Then her and Ma ran a boarding house. And then when Ma died, she went to live with Grace for a while. Then Grace got married, and then she moved into Carrie's house. And she ultimately died in Carrie's house. Pretty much, she had no children, and she was never married. So anything beyond the first part of I'll Be Waving As You Drive Away, where Mary becomes blind in Walnut Grove, everything else is completely fictional for the show. I used to think, as a viewer, that they gave Mary a far better life than she had in real life. But unfortunately, they made it worse. And we'll talk about how as I go along, okay? But in the end, Paul and Mary work it out, and Mary decides to stay in Winoka to care for the blind children. Mr. Standish gets his karma gets Mr. Standish in the end. But first we get introduced to the character of Toby No, who is known for If I Only Had a Brain, and that is The Wizard of Oz. He also starred in Meet Me in St. Louis and The Harvey Girls, one of my 3 favorite Judy Garland movies. I absolutely love this man. I think he was a talented actor, and it's nice to see him in this. Toby ends up winning the lottery, and Mr. Standish gets Toby drunk and makes him gamble all his money away. And Toby's left with nothing for the kids, who won a fireworks display for the 4th of July. But karma gets Mr. Standish in the end. His brat of a son goes up to the room where the fireworks are kept and goes to light one, but knocks down a kerosene lamp, which causes all the fireworks to go off and the saloon to go up in flames. While Mr. Standish goes, "Water, water, please, my building is on fire." Charles quits, so does Mr. Garvey, so does Mr. Olson. He gets drunk and gambles his money away and ends up getting more than enough. And the building blows up, and they all decide to go back to Walnut Grove, all but Mary. When they get to Walnut Grove, they found that the town is completely abandoned, and everything is overgrown over top of everything else. There's dust and cobwebs in the school/church. They have to basically get it up and running. They find out that Mr. Hanson, who owns Hanson Mill and also founded the town, has had a stroke and has lost the will to live because no one seems to want to help the town. Charles decides to rally everyone in town together to help fix the town back up and get it up and running. And that includes hacking away at the weeds and getting the mill up and running and getting everything back to normal. Charles decides to rally everyone in town to do this. Albert comes with them on the basis of learning how to be a farmer, but of course later he becomes Charles' son. More on that in a few minutes. And Charles ends up going to this one person, this one random couple who we never seen before and we never will see again, where he goes, "No, Mr. Ingalls, I have no intention of helping put this town back together. For the simple fact is, they came and they took our furniture, and my wife aged rapidly. She turned 47 today. Just look at her, Mr. Ingalls, just look at her." The camera suddenly zooms in on a woman that looks like she's 87 years old. I don't understand what this point in the episode was trying to do. I still don't understand it. But eventually they put the town back together. Mr. Hanson hears the church bell, gets up out of bed, and I finally saw the bank. But it must not have no significance. It seems to not have any significance throughout season 5. I guess. Hello guys, I'm back. The camera cut me off. Anyway, as I was saying, I guess everyone in Walnut Grove keeps their money in glass jars because the bank seems to have no significance whatsoever throughout season 5. Anyway, Mr. Hanson hears the church bell ringing, comes down, and is so happy the town is back together, all is right with the world. But unfortunately, Laura says in the voiceover that that Mr. Hanson died peacefully in his sleep 3 months later. And for some reason, she doesn't say this, but for some reason the town doesn't even have a funeral for this guy, and he's supposed to have founded the town. Unfortunately, in real life, Mr. Hanson's only significant role in the Ingalls family, yes, he was real, was to give them the land in Walnut Grove, but he did not found the town. And he does not even say anything, just y'all, whenever Charles is talking to him. And he ultimately gets Pet and Patty, too, the 2 horses that they have in the pilot movie, in the Banks of Plum Creek book. And I just saw the actor Carl Swanson in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. He was raising his glass going, "It's the end of the world!" This is Minute Maid fruit punch. This is so good. You guys need to try this. I absolutely love it. Anyway, sorry, I needed a drink. So after that is business as usual in the town. We get an episode called Finnegan, where Albert gets a male cow to raise, to take to the county fair. Laura gets jealous of all the attention Paul's given to Albert. We know where this goes, only in this instant, Albert doesn't die yet. In the next episode in Harriet's Happenings, the town gets its first newspaper, the Pen and Plow. Sorry, I know. Anyway, Harriet gets a gossip column that she calls Harriet's Happenings. She gossips about everyone in town. This is also the first episode where Albert calls Charles Paul. And also, for those of you wondering, well, why does Charles give Albert a cow? Back in those days, if a boy could raise a cow, a male cow, he was considered a man. And considered that he could take responsibility. I know, times have changed so much. It is amazing to me. The next episode we get is the wedding, where Mary and Adam get married, but unfortunately, this did not happen in real life, and Mary is unsure if she wants to marry Adam. Try saying that 7 times fast. Because when they're talking about children, they give her the impression that, oh no, I'm blind, I'm not going to be able to chase after a child. But lucky for them, a dust storm happens, and they have to go chase this blind child named Susan, who finds her way under the stairs where Albert lived when he was in Winoka. So, there you go. They get married in the end, and that's that. We then find ourselves back in Walnut Grove in an episode entitled Men Will Be Boys, where Andy and Albert bet their fathers that they can survive in the wilderness, and they do, and the fathers can't. Alright, let me briefly check here, because I can't remember all the episodes. We then get an episode called The Cheaters. Andy feels immense pressure because Mrs. Garvey is now the teacher, because Miss Beadle left at the end of season 4. I don't think she comes back. But it's interesting, she does guest star in the very first episode of The Waltons as a mother who leaves her deaf child on the doorstep of the Waltons' house, which is going to be on tomorrow at 12, and I'm going to watch it because I'm excited, because I get to finally watch it from the beginning. It's always a show I've always been interested in, like Little House on the Prairie. It reminds me of simpler times. Anyway, she does not make another appearance, but in the Cheaters episode, Andy feels immense pressure because she's like, do you know how hard it is knowing that the one with the lowest marks in the school is my son and I'm the teacher? Whoa, lady, slow your roll. You should be encouraging your child, not discouraging him. Not discouraging him. I mean, geez. And I guess Mr. Garvey is totally okay with Mrs. Garvey working now. Because he wasn't in the high cost of being right, but whatever, he's over it now. But Nellie helps him cheat by telling him to write the answers down, and she writes answers on her jacket. So there you go. And a fun trivia fact, I think I read this in Allison's book, when Mrs. Olsen is hitting her with the jacket, it's not acting because the buttons hurt her when she was hitting her with them. We then have 2 of the most wonderful episodes in Little House on the Prairie history, and that is The Blind Journey. Mary and Adam find out that they can no longer live in the blind school in Winoka, so they ask Charles and Caroline what to do, and everyone rallies in town to give them the house that got first introduced in Season 2's Haunted House, continued in For My Lady, was also the house that Johnny Cash visited when he was being a con man to help a woman pray because she couldn't get to church, and also where Frank and Jesse James hung out in Season 4. So this house has come a long way, and it's now officially the blind school. Meanwhile, Mr. Standish gets his karma again in this episode because he tries to sell Adam, a blind man, bad horses, and Mr. Ingalls takes the horses into Mr. Standish's now rebuilt saloon and basically humiliates him in front of his customers, which is hilarious, and this is his last appearance as far as I know. And Mrs. Olsen donates all the supplies for the blind school and decides to go on the journey because she thinks she's going to meet a rich aristocrat named Mrs. Telhoun, which turns out to be Esther Sue. We also get reintroduced to Joe Kagan, who was introduced in Season 4's The Fighter, and he's apparently been living in Walnut Grove this whole entire time, despite the fact that the town's been abandoned. And he helps them get back. And Mrs. Olsen is portrayed as being racist towards Black Americans, and ends up realizing she's being silly when she ends up getting paired up with a blind black boy who basically points out that black is just another color and that we're all the same and want the same things, and he wishes that the world could be blind to understand that, which is something the world needs to understand now. All of us just want to live in peace. Really. Isn't that true? And it's such a beautiful episode, and Catherine McGovern's performance is fantastic. After that, we have one of the most bizarre television episodes of any series I have ever seen in my life. And I know you are probably going to argue with me in my Facebook group because I have not seen the episode you all keep talking about where Albert has a dream where they're Indians or something. But this, The God Sister, is by far the weirdest episode. Carrie feels neglected. Charles is off putting telephone poles up, something he never did in real life with Mr. Garvey. And his boss is the father from Gimme a Break, a wonderful old sitcom with Nell Carter. But there's these weird sequences where the two sisters get to appear on screen, and it is so weird. At one point, they're walking through a field of candy. At one point, Carrie falls asleep and loses her penny, and they end up shrinking down to small size of being on top of a penny. At one point, they go to heaven and see Jack again. It is the most bizarre episode. While Charles is laying telephone poles, like this guy is hoarding potatoes and making whiskey, and the whole house he's making it in ends up blowing up in the end. It is a bizarre episode. Really freaking weird. Then we get a really sweet episode with Albert where he becomes an apprentice for a Jewish man who is making coffins, and ultimately his next project is making his own. And this episode is not syndicated. I've never seen it on television before due to the things they say about Jews in it, like Jews having horns and such, and other things I'm not going to repeat, but it's such a wonderful episode and I absolutely love it. Let's see here. After that, we get a really terrible filler episode that has not aged well called Blind Man's Bluff, where a kid pretends to be blind because his parents are on the verge of getting divorced. Which I've been there, and I can honestly say this episode does not age well. I did not care for it, and upon rewatch, if I ever watch these again, I'm going to skip that episode. Then Toby No comes back and Dance With Me with an episode with Elaine Harlett, who I just recently saw in The Bad Seed. Fantastic actress. Given the right material, she can go far. She also played Diane Keegan's mother in The First Wives Club, so it's really nice to see her in this. Her and Toby fall in love despite her being mean and him being city, but we never know what happens with them because we never see them again as far as I know, which is sad because I would love to have seen them get married. Then we have an episode that, knowing the history of Mary Ingalls, really pissed me off, called The Sound of Children. Mary finds out that she's pregnant, but she loses the baby in the end. Now, we know she has a baby on the show, but it burns up in the fire. Why would they do this to her? This is so wrong on so many levels, and it just makes me mad. The acting is phenomenal. There's this beautiful scene between Mary and the kid from that was with Mrs. Olsen on the blind journey that basically tells Mary, my mama abandoned me because I was blind and she had to take care of my sister. But I'll pretend to be your son, Miss Kendall. I might be not a baby no more, but I won't be no trouble. And it's so beautiful. I just love it. But for them to do that to her just made me so mad. Then the woman, Keezy, who was introduced in the season 4 premiere, who had the pretend house, is finally back, and apparently she has a house near the lake that they go over that bridge every time when they're going back home. And Mrs. Olsen, she doesn't pay taxes on her house, and Mrs. Olsen ends up taking possession of it and basically taking it away from her so that she can have a summer place. And Allison said that she enjoyed playing that, being in that episode. She said it was so fun. And I don't know what happens to this woman after this. She now has an actual house, but we never see the inside of it. So I'm not entirely sure. But it's a hilarious episode and I absolutely love it as well. Then we get another racist episode that is not syndicated called Burn Barner. barn burner where they all decide to go on one price for their feed, but Mr. Larrabee, who is also mean and racist in The Blind Journey, continues to be mean and racist in this episode, where he doesn't want to have the same price as a black man and basically goes against what everybody else wants. So then Jonathan goes and confronts him and basically calls him a racist without saying the word, and he gets angry and goes to Mr. Garvey's house, and when Andy says he's not there, he knocks him down and hits his head. He goes outside to go find his parents and leaves a lantern on, and when they come back, the barn is on fire for a second time. And they think it's Mr. Larrabee who has done it. It turns out he didn't do it, and Andy comes clean in the end, afraid that he might get in trouble, and Mr. Larrabee ends up losing everything in the end, even though Mr. Kagan stands up for him and says he doesn't think he's guilty because no one saw him set the barn on fire. But even then, Mr. Larrabee decides to be mean and not care and says he doesn't need anyone, and he loses his wife and children in the end. And hopefully that's his last appearance. Then we get yet another episode that pissed me off because I know the history of Mary Ingalls. The Enchanted Cottage. She thinks she's going to get her sight back. How and why they did this is absolutely horrible. To do this to her, to get her hopes up and then say, nope, you're still blind, is just so terrible. And the Enchanted Cottage refers to the fact that Laura decides to paint this old house that looks like Kizzy's house that we just saw in that previous episode not too long before that one. And she paints it pink, which, according to several trivia facts I read, was not a color available in the 1800s. So sad they did that. Then we have a really, really weird episode called Somebody Please Love Me. Whoops, sorry. The disc fell out. Called Somebody Please Love Me, where, Charles goes to some city to get some horses and ends up staying at this house and helps this father overcome his drinking problem, and everyone's not in this. So the whole thing of Melissa Gilbert being in every single episode is a lie. She's not in this episode at all. Then we get Moral Mission, where everyone in town gets anthrax poisoning. And I can't believe that happened over everything that happened to them over the course of this season. They all get it, and this is something that could have happened, but I'm not sure if it did or not. And then the season finale is The Odyssey, where this kid who we've never been introduced to before has leukemia and is dying and wants to see the ocean, and Charles, Laura, and Andy make sure they do. Overall, season 5 has a lot going on in it. We only spend 5 episodes in a different city, and then we find ourselves with hilarious episodes and then serious episodes like Moral Mission. I mean, it seems like we're packed full of drama, but also fun stuff too. And it seems like season 6 is going to get back that balance, so far I can tell. I absolutely love this show, and I love all of you. Sorry guys, camera cut me off again. Anyway, I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you all had a wonderful Halloween, and I hope the person you voted for won in the election. I hope that all of you continue to be safe, and you wear a mask and social distance and all that stuff. And I appreciate you loving these reviews and watching them and telling me how much you love them, and I hope that everyone has a safe and fantastic Thanksgiving. And I'll see you in the next one. Remember, home is the nicest word there is. Thank you so much for watching.